Hank, what's it like to be the follow-up act to the Beatles?
Maybe I'll talk about Goldman Sachs.
Let's pick up on that hedge fund point. That was just terrific. And really, seriously, as a segue, you ran one of the world's preeminent investment banks. You were Secretary of the Treasury at this key time. I know a lot of your private interests in education and promoting conservation around the world, but what was your reaction to what you heard from Sal?
I tell you, it was very, like everyone else in this audience, it was very energizing for me because, like so many people, I think that our education system is a disgrace, and it's very easy to be hopeless, feel a bit hopeless. I've been very concerned about disparities in income gap, and as much as I've been very proud of U.S. innovation, in most cases, when I talk to innovators in Silicon Valley, what they're doing is things that are exciting and you got to be for them, but they're destroying jobs. Okay, and industry after industry, the middle is being hollowed out, whether it's business, whether it's engineering, whether it's architecture, whether it's a legal profession. And so I'm wondering, somehow or other, I believe that technology is going to be the answer. But I'm wondering how we deal with this widening gap.
Where will the jobs really come from?
And I'll tell you, this is, to me, so that's why it's actually the most inspiring story I've heard for a while. And frankly, the reason we have our grandchildren with us, and Wendy hated to leave them to fly here today, and the reason my wife is here with me today is because Saul was speaking, and so and so she knew more about him than I did. So I can see now why she wanted to hear him.
Terrific. Well, let's pick up with the Hank Paulson story. Hank, you had an experience that very few people have ever had. You were at the center, the absolute center of a global economic crisis, the biggest economic crisis for our country since the Great Depression. Before you talk about just the technical sides of that and the decisions made, what was it like for you personally, for you and Wendy? Did you not sleep at night? Did you take up drink? Did you? I know that's. I remember a dinner that actually the four of us had in the middle of all of this. But none of us have ever been there to feel that sense of burden and responsibility, and like, if this doesn't go well, history is not going to treat me well. What was that like?
Well, I think this may be hard for some of you to believe, but in many ways you all went through it with me, and I bet most people in this room have gone through a crisis. And so in one sense, this wasn't as different from some of the other crises I'd been through in business as you might expect. Because when you're boiling in oil, it doesn't make much difference if it's 150 degrees or 180 or 190.
It's hot.
It's hot, and you're boiling in oil. So what I found was, but the hardest times for me was when I was engaged in playing offense, I was preoccupied. So the toughest times for me were when I woke up in the middle of the night. I'd go home, I'd go sound asleep immediately. Because in the middle of the night, little problems seem big and big problems seem insurmountable. But in terms of crisis decision making, and I think most of you know this, that in very few instances in any kind of business decision making do you have all the data you'd like. If you do, you're looking in the rearview mirror and it's too late. And so what you're doing is you're trading off taking an action which is imperfect. When you got a big, ugly problem, you never find a perfect, elegant solution. So, which is going to have some known and unknown consequences, but you're trading off taking that decision versus doing nothing and what's going to happen if you do nothing. And so in one sense, it's easier to get things done. And the biggest thing I had going for me was not my experience in financial markets, but that I'm decisive by nature, and I'm not afraid to change course if I make a mistake. And so you have to be prepared to make decisions quickly, and if the facts or the information changes, you need to be prepared to change. I think the other thing, you learn a lot about the people around you, and there are a couple of people here. I mean, I had Bob Steele was right by me, and some other, and people that I'd had an opportunity to work with, some I hadn't had an opportunity to work with before. But it really takes a team. And the interesting thing about the crisis was the things we were working on, you sometimes, unless you were a moron, in which case we didn't want you on the team, you knew that if you succeeded, you weren't going to be a hero, you're going to be criticized. And if you really failed, you were really going to be criticized. If you say to someone, how would you like to work on the Citigroup rescue? If you,
right.
Well, if you, certainly people that had an interest in a political career running for office weren't going to be any good. And so you had to be prepared to do things that were unpopular.
Right.
But it's not as different. Trust me, the consequences were greater. And I got to tell you, there were times in the middle of the night when I worried about being Andrew Mellon. But for the most part, it just wasn't that different than other crises.
Go back to, I've always felt, Hank, that there's really just two kind of people in the world when you're in a position of responsibility. People who can get stuff done and people who can't.
Well, yeah.
And I'm just sort of curious, the people who were truly helpful to you, what was the common denominator?
Well, these are people, I always said when I looked at leaders, people I admire, the ones I admire are the ones who define their job expansively and run to problems rather than running away. Okay? And I just kept turning to the same group of people over and over again because others, because they knew how to get things done. They weren't afraid to take a risk. They had a strong sense of integrity, and they were action-oriented people. And one of the when President Bush asked me to become Treasury Secretary, I turned it down the first couple of times. And if I'd known what an honor it was going to be, I would have taken it the first time. But one of the things I asked for, stipulated, was that I would be able to pick my team and be able to replace any political appointee regardless of party. And I brought down some people that I knew, people that I'd worked with before and I trusted, and then picked another group of people that I hadn't worked with before, but I spent time with them. I knew they would be good. I mean, one of them was someone who had worked with Condi Rice and came over and was my chief of staff. But these are all people. I looked for two things. First of all, could they get things done? And the other thing I looked for, would they complement me? Because before I became a CEO, I'd worked with many CEOs, many outstanding leaders, some that weren't as outstanding in government and outside of government. And what I learned was there is no such thing as a perfect leader. The strengths are flip sides of the weakness. Hank is candid, he's indiscreet. Hank is decisive, he's not thoughtful enough. And so the people that succeed are the ones that get the right people around them and that compensate for their weaknesses, and you listen to those people. And if you don't, trust me, in the big jobs, your weaknesses always get uncovered and you fail. So having the right team of people around you. And that team has to be some people that run to problems rather than run away from them.